It was supposed to just be a regular night at the movies. A gun alone, the rain pouring down in sheets as I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot. There was something comforting about the storm. It was loud, constant, and outside, the world felt distant. Inside the theater, it was warm, dry, and alive with the hum of trailers flickering across the screen. The perfect escape. But things didn't stay perfect. The storm outside raged harder. At first, there was a slight tremor in the air, like the ground underfoot was flexing. Then, a low, ominous rumble rolled through the theater, shaking the chairs. The screen flickered, the lights blinked, and the sound cut out for a moment. The audience fell into a brief, uneasy silence before the lights went dark completely. Total blackout. There was a collective gasp from the crowd. I could hear the rustling of people's movements, the shuffle of shoes, the soft sighs of frustration. Then, the emergency lights kicked on, but they only barely illuminated the rows. It was like the world outside had swallowed us whole. The air in the room grew heavy, damp even, as if the storm was pressing in against the walls. I couldn't hear the rain anymore, only the low, distant growl of thunder. Someone in the back of the theater swore loudly. A few others started talking, muttering nervously. There were about 15 of us left, people who had all decided to stay despite the storm's fury. The staff had evacuated, a projection booth was abandoned, and we were all left in the dark with nothing but our fears. I shifted in my seat, trying to get a sense of what was happening. The murmurs in the dark were unsettling. Too many whispers from too many different places. I could hear someone breathing too hard, and I couldn't tell if it was someone just trying to calm themselves or someone else trying to hide something. "Is everyone okay?" A woman's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. "I'm fine," someone else responded, too quickly. His voice was a little too calm. I couldn't see him, but I felt his presence like a shadow creeping over me. I swallowed hard, gripping the armrests, trying to steady myself. The air felt thick, the kind of repressive weight that makes your chest feel tight. I wasn't sure if it was the storm or something else. Something was wrong. The thunder outside cracked, and the building shook, but it was the sound of footsteps that caught my attention. There was movement in the rows. Someone was walking towards the front of the theater. I couldn't see their face, but their footsteps were deliberate, slow. They didn't sound like a person trying to hurry out of the dark. They sounded like someone who didn't care if anyone noticed. I heard the shuffle again, this time behind me, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Someone else spoke, but their words made no sense. They sounded too muffled, too broken. A joke, maybe? Or an attempt to calm the group? But I didn't feel calm. The footsteps stopped, and then there was a soft, almost inaudible voice in my ear. "You don't know who they are, do you?" My heart froze. I spun in my seat, but no one was there. I scanned the dark rows. There were shapes, seated figures, but I couldn't make out their faces. There was too much shadow, too much flickering from the dim emergency lights. Then I realized something. They were all too still, too quiet. Another voice rose from the darkness. This one coming from a man 2 rows behind me. "What the hell's going on?" "I think someone's messing with us," another woman replied, her voice shaky. "Just wait. The lights will come back on soon." The room was filled with tension now. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something to happen, but no one moved. No one spoke. I felt the chill creeping along my skin as the minutes ticked by. Time felt stretched thin, like it was going to snap any second. Suddenly, a scream tore through the air, high-pitched, panicked. A man bolted from his seat and rushed toward the exit, but before he could reach the doors, the power came back on. The lights flickered, steady now, and the screen blinked to life. But it was all wrong. The movie wasn't playing anymore. Instead, it was a live feed of the theater, of us. The same seats, the same people, the same dim lighting. But there was something different. The faces in the footage weren't right. They were distorted, as though someone had smeared the screen with Vaseline, their eyes too wide, their smiles too stretched. The camera slowly panned to the back of the room, where the man had bolted from. There, sitting quietly in his seat, was the same man, but his eyes were hollow, his face pale and frozen in place. I turned quickly, scanning the rows again. He wasn't there anymore. My pulse raced. "What the hell is this?" someone shouted. Another scream, closer this time, from the back. I froze. Someone or something was there. Then, the woman beside me whispered, too quietly for anyone else to hear, "You're not supposed to be here." I stared at her, Her face didn't look like it had moments ago. Her eyes, they were too dark, too deep, and her lips twisted into a smile. Something changed inside of me. I didn't know who they were anymore. I didn't know who any of us were, but I did know one thing. They weren't going to let me leave. The wind howled outside, a monstrous scream that rattled the windows and shook the very foundation of the house. My ears were ringing from the deafening roar, and I could feel the house groaning as if it were alive, struggling against the storm's ferocity. There was a tornado, and it was close now. I could feel it in my bones. I rushed to the storm shelter door, the heavy metal hatch hidden beneath the floorboards of my living room. It had always felt like a safe place, something I built long ago with the certainty that it would protect me if something had ever happened. I had a feeling tonight wasn't going to be like a normal storm. My breath was ragged as I scrambled to get the door open. The wind outside was so loud it felt like my ears were going to burst. I could hear the distant sounds of trees cracking and debris being tossed around, a signal that the twister was near. But that wasn't the only thing that I could hear. There was a soft, steady knocking coming from the other side of the storm shelter door. At first, I thought it was just the storm, but then the knocking grew more intense, more insistent, and my heart skipped a beat. I froze, staring at the door, unable to comprehend what I was hearing. This is in my living room. Who is in my living room? Knock, knock, knock. I knew what was happening. My friends, or at least the people I thought were my friends, were outside. They had been here with me, sharing the storm, laughing nervously as the winds picked up, but something was off. I'd seen it in their eyes. There was something about the way they looked at me, the way they whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. They'd been waiting for this, for me to open the shelter. The pounding on the door grew louder, frantic now. My pulse raced. The whispers, the strange looks, they hadn't been friendly. I realized, with a horrible jolt of realization, that they didn't want the shelter to protect me. They wanted in. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking. "What do you want?" I said, my voice shaking above the storm. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice, a familiar voice, whispered from the other side. "Let us in. We need to survive." I felt a chill run down my spine. Their voices, once warm and comforting, now sounded hollow, foreign. The words were coded in desperation, but there was something else, something far darker beneath them. "Let us in." The words echoed in my head, twisting. I pressed my ear to the door. I could hear breathing, heavy and uneven, coming from the other side. The storm outside was relentless, but what was even worse was the fact that the wind wasn't the only thing roaring now. They were out there, clawing at the hatch, banging against the door, as if they had become part of the storm itself. I took a deep breath and gripped the handle, trying to steady myself. My mind was racing. If I let them in, would it be a disaster? Would I survive the storm and lose my life to them? Or would I lock myself in, alone, and face the storm's fury by myself? The knocking stopped abruptly. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. Then, a voice came again, but this time, there wasn't just one person. "Let us in, or we'll make you." The tone was cold, menacing. I staggered back, terrified. I knew the people on the other side. I knew their faces, but this wasn't them. This wasn't the people who I had shared drinks and jokes with just a few hours earlier. This was something else entirely, something dark and twisted. Suddenly, the door shook with a violent crash, as if something had slammed against it with all its force. The wood splintered, the hatch rattled. The sound of their voices mixed with the wind, growing louder, more aggressive. "Let us in now, or we'll take you." I backed away, my legs weak beneath me. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything that could help. The phone, the knife, the keys to my car, but none of them mattered. There was only one thing that mattered now, the door. I had to keep them out. My pulse was a frantic drumbeat in my ears. They were outside. They were right there. I could feel them, even without seeing them, their breath, hot and ragged, pressing against the cold steel of the shelter door. I placed a board across the door to help barricade it. The storm had turned the world into chaos, but what was left behind that door, those people, was a far greater threat right now. The door rattled again, this time with a sickening crack, like something had snapped. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went still. The wind outside howled louder than ever, but the pounding on the door had stopped. I stood there, gasping for air, listening. The silence was suffocating. Then I heard it, softly and calm. We'll wait. The door shook once more, but this time it wasn't the people outside. It was the storm, the tornado, and it was tearing through the house. The wind screamed as it tore through the walls, pulling at everything in its path. But I didn't care about that anymore. I pressed my ear to the door, waiting for their next move. I knew they were still out there, whoever and whatever they were, waiting for the storm to pass, waiting for me to open that door. The storm had been raging for hours. The wind howled outside, and the rain pounded the roof like 1,000 restless hands. I could feel the house tremble with every strike of thunder, the air thick with electricity, but it wasn't the storm that had my attention tonight. No, it was something much worse, something I couldn't shake from my mind. I had been standing at my window for what felt like an eternity, my eyes fixed on the cemetery across the street for some reason. The way the old gravestones seemed to lean into the wind, the shadows of the trees swaying violently under the pressure of the storm, it all felt so wrong tonight. The cemetery had always unnerved me, even before tonight. The way the dead seemed to whisper on quiet nights when the cold wind wasn't so deafening. I had never been brave enough to cross the street and see it up close, but tonight I couldn't look away. The storm's fury seemed to intensify as the minutes dragged on, each rumble of thunder louder, closer, as though the sky itself were threatening to tear apart. The power flickered, casting long, eerie shadows in the house, but it always came back on. Every time it did, I returned my gaze to that cursed cemetery. And then I saw it. A small figure against the backdrop of the storm moved slowly amongst the gravestones. At first, I thought it might have been a trick of the wind, some sort of illusion caused by the rain or the flickering of light. But no, there it was again. The figure was hunched over, digging in the wet earth beside a grave, a shovel raised and then thrust into the ground, over and over. I felt my stomach twist into knots, the hair in the back of my neck standing at attention. My pulse raced. My first instinct was to call the police, but who would believe me? Who would believe that in the midst of such a storm, someone would be in a cemetery digging up a grave? The figure paused, glancing around nervously, as if checking for witnesses. The shadows of the cemetery seemed to shift, the trees groaning in protest against the wind. For a moment, I wondered if the storm itself was angry, and it's somehow complicit in this dark act. And then, as if to answer my unspoken question, the figure pulled something from the ground. It was a body, lifeless, pale, and soaked from the storm's brutal downpour. I recoiled, my breath catching in my throat. The grave robber, because that's what I realized they were, held the body with unnatural reverence, his hand moving quickly, almost eagerly, as he started to drag the corpse toward the nearby car parked at the far edge of the cemetery. The sight of the body, the pale skin illuminated by the flash of lightning, made my stomach churn violently. I couldn't look away, even though every instinct inside me screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but watch. I could hear the rain pounding louder, feel the vibrations of thunder as though the very earth were shaking beneath me. The figure was almost through the car now, and for a moment, I thought they were going to vanish into the night, the storm hiding their crime. But then something strange happened. The car's headlights flickered on, and in the bright, unforgiving light, I saw the face of the figure. It was a man, but his features were twisted with something dark, something I couldn't name. A look of pure hunger and insatiable need, like he was more than just a thief. He was a predator. I gasped, my heart thundering in my chest as the figure turned and looked directly at my window. For a split second, I thought he had seen me. The storm roared louder, drowning at my breath as he stood there, just staring at me. The world seemed to freeze for one terrifying heartbeat, the wind howling around him, the rain blurring his form. But his eyes, they were cold, unblinking, and fixated on me. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, the grave robber turned and hurried toward the car. I could hear the engine start with a low growl, and within seconds, the car sped off, disappearing into the night, leaving nothing but the storm and the sound of my pounding heart. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty cemetery, my mind racing to process what I had just witnessed. The rain was still pouring, the wind still howling, but the air felt very heavy now, thick with a sense of dread. I couldn't explain why, but I had the feeling the storm wasn't over, not by a long shot. I backed away from the window, my legs shaky beneath me, and I turned to leave the room. I caught a glimpse of something outside the corner of my eye. The reflection of the cemetery, of that dark, twisted graveyard, was visible in the glass of the window. And there, standing amongst the gravestones, was the figure again. Only this time, there was no shovel. The grave was still open, the earth clawed and broken, and the body, it was gone. But I swear, as the lightning cracked the sky open once more, I saw the figure's eyes, and they were staring right back at me. His mouth slowly grinned, and I knew he had seen me.